If you grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona, then you know the story of the Apache Death Cave like the back of your hand. It was a story told at every slumber party, and every campfire had been the silent witness to countless tellings of the story. Haunted houses were themed upon the legend, and more than one child had been threatened with being taken to the cave if they didn't behave. Every young boy bragged that they weren't afraid of nothing, not even the Apache Death Cave, to impress ponytailed young girls. And even more drunken men bragged that they'd gone to the cave and it wasn't nothing, even if they had scurried back to their pickup trucks with the rest of the football team. Those details were always lost in the retelling of the stories, and it didn't matter how old the man either. And the bartender always had a mm-hmm and a nod waiting. Taylor Jones didn't grow up in Flagstaff. Her mother, Francine, had been transferred there from Tucson, so, along with her little brother Teddy and her father Bob, they had moved in July, and Taylor had started high school at Flagstaff High in August of 2003. Taylor hadn't wanted to move. She missed her friends and her high school activities, and Flagstaff was like living in another state with its pine trees and cool weather. The homes weren't cookie-cutter, the yards were green with grass rather than colored gravel, and there wasn't a cactus for miles. The only clothes she owned were shorts, sandals, and t-shirts. She had to go shopping for clothes geared towards a cooler climate, and she couldn't even remember having worn a pair of jeans before, let alone a long-sleeved shirt. She suddenly felt awkward and out of place. But after a few weeks, Taylor was seated next to Emily for a science class, and her and Emily started to become good friends. Emily had grown up in Flag. Her father worked for one of the resorts, and her mother owned a coffee shop. Like Taylor, Emily had blonde hair and brown eyes, but Emily was tall and played volleyball, whereas Taylor was on the short side at 5'2" and had been a cheerleader at her previous school. Emily began introducing Taylor to her friends, and by the spring, Taylor was feeling much more comfortable. She tried out for the soccer team and made it, and she had a group of male and female friends of about 8 people who were really great. She started to stop calling her friends from Tucson as much, and was feeling nicely settled in. One Friday night, Taylor spent the night at Emily's with 2 other girls, Cameron and Kelly. The girls were in the basement with sleeping bags, bowls of popcorn, freshly made cookies that Emily's mom had prepared for them, and a stack of DVDs to watch, when Emily asked Taylor if she'd heard the story of the Apache Death Cave yet, to which Taylor replied that she had not. "Oh, you haven't been initiated yet, then," said Emily. "Come on, Kelly, will you turn the lights off?" asked Emily as she ran upstairs to ask her mother if they could light a couple of candles if she promised to blow them out right after the story. Emily came back down the stairs with the candles and gathered the girls round into a group. "This must be a flag thing?" asked Taylor. "Oh, no. It's a warning thing," replied Cameron, while putting her hands up like cat paws, wiggling her fingers and then making a ooh sound. Emily started in with the story. In 1829, a group of Apache raiders raided a Navajo camp. They stole all of the tribe's valuables and supplies. When all was said and done, only 3 young girls were alive, and they were captured and taken by the Apache. Word got back to a neighboring Navajo camp, and they sent raiders and trackers to find the Apache. They searched and searched, but they could not find them. Then another Navajo camp was raided, so the Navajo knew that the Apache were still there, and they sent out more raiders and trackers to find the Apache. And as they were searching Canyon Diablo, they came upon a hole in the ground. There were voices coming from the hole, and hot air from a fire. The Navajo quickly discovered that the Apache were hiding in a large cave, large enough to fit them, their supplies, including the stolen ones, and their horses. The scouts were sent to return back to the Navajo camp. where the Navajo came back with a vengeance, sending even more raiders. After killing the 2 Apache watchmen at the entrance of the cave, they gathered sagebrush and driftwood from the canyon floor, and they lit a fire at the mouth of the cave. Now aware of the attack, because of the smoke billowing into their hiding spot, the Apache slit the throats of their horses to use the blood and what they had left of their water to try and put the fire out. When that didn't work, they tried to block the entrance to the cave with the corpses of their dead horses. One Apache man had escaped through the fire and went to the Navajo raiders, begging for mercy. The Navajo, as was their tradition, offered the man an exchange of goods and stock for forgiveness. The representative agreed, and just as it appeared that an agreement was made and an end to the attack was coming, a Navajo raider asked the spokesman about the 3 young girls, and when he hesitated, he was killed, as the Navajo knew at that moment that their fears were confirmed and the girls were no longer alive. Furious and enraged, the Navajo began to shoot their guns into the cave and stoked the fire even higher. It is said that the sound of the Apache filling the cave with their voices, singing their death songs, could be heard for a great distance. When the smoke cleared and the songs faded, the Navajo broke through the barrier of the charred horses' bodies and found 42 men dead from suffocation. The Navajo stripped them of their valuables and took back their goods. From that day on, no Apache ever used the cave again and never raided another Navajo camp. Some people say that you can still hear the songs and the screams coming from the burned remains of the cave, and that the Apache men's bodies were never removed, but instead left there as a warning to all who may enter it. Cameron grabbed Taylor by her shoulders and yelled, "Boo!" All the girls jumped and began to giggle. "That's not a true story, right?" asked Taylor. "Better believe it is," replied Emily as she blew out the candles, while someone else turned the lights back on. "Yeah," began Kelly. "Everyone knows the story. Our parents, their parents, and on back. All the settlers were warned about the land being haunted. My dad says that he knows families who've had family members go missing after going to the cave," said Cameron. "Uh-huh," started Emily. "Remember the Stevens family? Their son went to kindergarten with us. Craig. Yeah, well, my mom said that the reason that they moved was because his older sister went to the cave, and they ended up finding her body 30 feet from it, and she was burned." "Nuh-uh," said Cameron. "Yes," snapped Emily. "You want to go ask my mom?" "No. Okay. I remember that he was here for only a few months, but I never heard anything about where he went." "I did," said Kelly. "My grandpa told me about it. He said that his best friend died out there when he was about 16, too. They found him burned. No suspects either." "Hey, I have an idea. How about we head out there next week? It's spring break. We can show Taylor, plus I've never been." Taylor raised her hand in protest, not particularly sure that she wanted to go to a death cave in a place called Canyon Diablo. "Nah, I'm good. I'm going to take your word for it." But Emily began to insist, thinking that the idea was sounding even better. "Listen, we're working on that science project, right? Let's go and collect some samples from inside the cave. Check for carbon residue. Take some rocks for samples. It could be cool. Plus, it's a local myth and history. I think we could get a good grade out of it." The girls agreed, and each asked their parents, but only Emily and Taylor were allowed to go. So they made their plans. They took Emily's car and loaded it with a shovel, some slides, a razor for scraping, plenty of water, some flashlights. Emily's dad made her take a flare gun in case of emergency, some snacks, a camera, 2 spades, batteries, and Emily had her cell phone, but they weren't sure they'd get coverage. Then, Taylor's mom packed an emergency kit with Band-Aids, tweezers, a piece of rubber for a tourniquet in case of a snake bite, alcohol swabs, cotton pads, sunscreen, and anything else in the world she thought might come in handy. Taylor was embarrassed to show it to Emily's mom, who laughed and laughed when she saw that it was a backpack full of items. "Well, you'll be able to survive the apocalypse, too," she said while laughing. "On the other hand, tell your mom I want one, too." And they were off on their adventure. They'd printed out a map from MapQuest, and before too long, they found 2 guns. The abandoned little town where they were going to park and walk to the cave. Soon they found themselves immersed in getting scrapings and gathering rocks. They stayed up in front of the cave for a while, taking soil samples. "You think there's blood in this soil? Horse blood?" asked Emily. "Nah, I doubt it. If it actually happened, it was a long time ago. But it can't hurt to check, I guess. Make sure you get the samples from about a foot down or so, maybe even 2 feet. The sand blows a lot. It builds up." Then they moved to the back of the cave, and before they knew it, they had lost all track of time, and the cave was becoming dark. They took out their flashlights and began to wrap things up, when slowly and quietly, they both heard voices as if off in the distance, yet reverberating off the cave walls at the same time. "Shh," said Taylor. "Can you hear that?" And Emily nodded her head, yes. "Is someone outside the cave?" she asked, but before Taylor could answer, they began to hear the voices more clearly, bouncing off the cave walls ever so gently. Singing? No. Chanting? Both, thought Taylor, and the voices kept becoming louder until the sand underneath them began popping like popcorn from the vibrations. Both girls jumped up, which was when they noticed the black, billowing smoke and the smell. The smell so putrid and thick that it felt to Emily as though it were liquid expanding in her throat. Both girls began to run for the front of the cave, but as they stepped, the sand seemed to turn from soil into something hard and lumpy, and felt as though whatever it was snapping under the weight of the girls' feet. Taylor turned her flashlight to the ground, and what she saw brought up from the deepest region of her belly a scream like none she'd ever uttered before. They were running on bones, white bones, reaching out from the floor of the cave, penetrating their shoes with fingers that felt like shards of glass. Emily's father was concerned about the girls when it became late in the evening and he couldn't get a call through, so he drove to Two Guns and found their car. He phoned the police, and they met him there. Together they found the cave, and Emily, sprawled on the cave floor, her hands brought up to her neck, her fingers curled as if trying to pull something off from around her throat. Her shoes burned and melted into her skin. Barely able to gasp for air, she was taken to the hospital in Flagstaff, which is where she whispered out the details of the event to the nurse attending to her burns before she succumbed to smoke inhalation. Search dogs found Taylor some 5 miles away, sitting under a charred shrub, her face unrecognizable, her body so severely burned, her burned hands clasped into fists, raised up next to her head as if to cover her ears. This story has been pieced together from interviews given by the police and fire departments, the coroner, Cameron and Kelly, the parents of both girls, and, of course, the emergency room nurse. Inside the cave were the girls' belongings, dropped where they'd left them. Nothing appeared to be missing, nor was anything damaged. No one knows exactly what happened to Taylor and Emily, but they live on in the stories told beside a roaring fire at the campground and on the beds of little girls having slumber parties, and in the Apache Death Cave in Two Guns, Arizona.
Hi everyone, make sure to subscribe to Exit Live and give this video a big thumbs up. And don't forget to share with all of your friends.